If Apple never creates the iPhone, the first thing that disappears is not the smartphone. Someone still builds one eventually. The parts already exist. The demand already exists. What disappears is January 9th, 2007, the day a computer company stands on a stage in San Francisco and proves to the entire phone industry that they don't have to run the show anymore. That's the rule that actually breaks. Not touchscreens, not apps, control over what happens on the device in your pocket. To see why that matters, you have to look at January 2007 the way it actually worked, not the way it gets remembered. A regional sales manager in Ohio clips a BlackBerry to his belt every morning. It sends email, it makes calls, it has a keyboard the size of a matchbox, and every part of it belongs, in practice, to Verizon. Verizon decides which software can load onto it. Verizon decides which icons sit on the home screen. If a small company wants to put an app on that phone, they don't pitch the public. They pitch a carrier's deck, a walled garden of pre-approved programs, usually ringtones, horoscopes, and a stock ticker that costs $2 a month. Nobody calls this the app economy, because there isn't one. There's a landlord, and the landlord is the phone company. That's the normal world this scenario enters. In this version, Apple never builds the device that breaks the landlord's grip. The Mac and iPod stay Apple's business. Steve Jobs keeps making music players and laptops, and the rest of the industry keeps doing exactly what it was already doing, just for longer than it actually got to. The first place you'd notice the difference isn't in a store, it's in a boardroom you never see. In this scenario, Google's early Android team, led by Andy Rubin, keeps building the device they originally set out to build in 2006, something that looks a lot like a BlackBerry, a small screen above a full physical keyboard designed to compete with BlackBerry and Nokia's Symbian phones on their own terms. In our timeline, that whole plan got scrapped and rebuilt around a touchscreen within weeks of watching Apple's keynote. Take the keynote away, and there's no reason to rebuild. Android ships as a keyboard phone. A decent one, not a revolution. A competent alternative operating system fighting for shelf space next to a dozen others nobody outside the industry can name. That's the first break. Not a product disappearing, but a pivot never happening. An entire company's roadmap keeps going in the direction it was already headed, because nothing forced it to reconsider. The hidden system underneath all of this is carrier gatekeeping, and it doesn't just delay smartphones, it delays what smartphones are allowed to be. In our history, Apple's deal with AT&T was unusual, specifically because Apple, not the carrier, controlled the software, the updates, and eventually the App Store's rules and revenue split. That arrangement is the actual invention. The glass screen was the headline. The contract was the earthquake. Without a company willing to walk into a carrier's office and say, no, you don't get to touch the software, that arrangement doesn't happen on that timeline. Carriers keep their decks. Manufacturers keep building phones that carriers control. And a two-person startup trying to build something like a photo-sharing app has nowhere to put it, no unified payment system, and no audience that isn't fragmented across a dozen incompatible carrier stores. Watch what that does to timing. In this scenario, the App Store, one catalog, one payment system, 30% to Apple and 70% to the developer, available to anyone with a laptop and an idea, doesn't exist to copy. So nobody copies it right away either. The independent app developer as a career doesn't really exist yet. The people who would have built the breakout photo app, the breakout game, the breakout note-taking tool, are still emailing carrier business development departments asking for shelf space, the way indie musicians used to mail demo tapes to radio stations. Some of them give up. Some of them build for the web instead, because the web, unlike a carrier deck, doesn't ask anyone's permission. That single redirection matters more than it sounds like it should. A huge amount of what became mobile culture, the camera-first, instant, always-in-your-pocket kind of sharing, actually started as an App Store phenomenon because phones were finally good enough cameras and finally had one unified place to distribute software fast. Take that away, and photo culture keeps living where it already lived. Desktop websites, digital cameras you still carry separately, USB cables you still own. In this scenario, something like Instagram either launches years later than it did, once phones catch up on their own schedule, or it launches first as a website, the way plenty of mobile-first companies actually began as desktop companies before anyone assumed otherwise. There are people who do very well in this world, and it's worth naming them plainly. BlackBerry's maker holds onto the enterprise market for years longer because nothing forces IT departments to reconsider what a company phone means. Nokia keeps its lead outside North America with Symbian, still the most used phone software on Earth for a stretch nobody expected to last that long. Point-and-shoot camera makers sell a few more product cycles before a phone camera becomes good enough to replace them, because there's less commercial pressure pushing camera quality forward on a yearly release cycle. Dedicated GPS units, the ones people use to suction cup to a windshield, stay a real product category for longer, because turn-by-turn navigation baked into a free app isn't yet an assumption everyone carries around. None of this is a coincidence. Every one of these industries had already built a business on the idea that specialized devices beat convergence. The iPhone is what proved them wrong, all at once, in public. Remove that proof, and the old argument, people will still carry more than one device, keeps sounding reasonable, because nobody's shown them otherwise yet. Somewhere in the middle of this, there's a specific kind of person who gets stuck, the one who was actually right early. A product designer somewhere pitches a phone with no physical keyboard, all screen, controlled by touch, sometime around 2005 or 2006, because those pitches really did exist inside multiple companies before Apple shipped. In this scenario, without a public success story to point to, that pitch dies in committee, not because it was wrong, because it was early, and nobody wants to be first without cover. That's a small, unglamorous kind of loss, and it happens constantly in industries where timing is worth more than correctness. Eventually, touchscreen smartphones with real app stores still arrive. This isn't a scenario where the technology never comes. But the arrival looks different, and it arrives on someone else's terms. In one plausible version, it's Google, several years further along, finally shipping the touchscreen App Store version of Android. It might have built anyway once component costs dropped, and the market got crowded enough to reward it. But without the urgency of racing a company that already proved the concept, that shift takes longer to justify internally, and it launches into a market where 3 or 4 carriers still expect a cut of everything and a say in what ships. The resulting app stores look more like what carrier decks used to look like. More bloatware, more preloaded partner deals, more friction between a developer and a customer. Because no single company ever set the norm that a phone's software belongs to the person holding it and not the company billing them monthly. And that's the overlooked trade-off sitting underneath the whole scenario. A slower arrival isn't automatically a gentler one. The eventual smartphone era in this version is less centralized. Sure, more competing app stores, more variety, less of any single company's design taste stamped on every device. But it's also less accountable to any single company's incentive to keep the thing clean, because no one ever had to prove that a phone could work without carrier interference. Fragmentation looks like freedom until you're the developer filling out 5 different store applications instead of 1, or the customer whose phone came with 11 apps you can't delete because a carrier got paid to put them there. There's a real-life mirror in this that's easy to miss if you only think about it as no iPhone, no big deal, something else would have happened. The honest reveal isn't that Apple's product was irreplaceable. It's that almost nothing about the last 2 decades of mobile life was inevitable on the schedule we got it on. Contactless payment, a camera good enough to replace a camera, a map that talks to you, an app store where a stranger's idea can reach 100 million people without asking a phone company's permission first. None of that showed up because the technology matured on its own timer. It showed up because one company, at one moment, decided the landlord didn't get a vote anymore and was willing to prove it in public rather than pitch it in private. Take that single decision away, and the technology still eventually gets built. What doesn't necessarily get built, on any predictable schedule, is the moment somebody actually hands the keys back to the person holding the device. Picture that Ohio sales manager again, years further down this version of the timeline. He's carrying something with a touchscreen now, everybody eventually does. But he still has 3 carrier apps he can't delete, a software update he's still waiting on his phone company to approve before it reaches his device, and a faint, permanent sense that the phone in his hand answers to somebody else's billing department before it answers to him. He never got the version where somebody walked into that room and said no. He just got the version where, eventually, enough time passed that it didn't matter as much anymore, which might be the real difference this whole scenario reveals. Not what technology shows up, but who ends up deciding when.